Duke Nathaniel Harcourt ordered his wife's seed collection emptied into the river. By tomorrow, he declared, his voice carrying across the crowded courtyard, not one grain stored under the Duchess's authority will remain in the Harcourt granaries. 14 years of Clara's work lay arranged across a long oak table. There were drawers of barley selected from the western hills, beans preserved through 2 wet summers, and wheat gathered from tenant families whose fields had survived when neighboring farms failed. Every envelope bore Clara's handwriting, the date of its harvest, and the name of the family that had helped cultivate it. Now footmen carried the drawers toward 2 waiting wagons. Clara stood at the opposite end of the table, her hands motionless at her sides. She would not give Nathaniel the spectacle of watching her beg. "Those seeds are not ornaments," she said. "Some of those varieties are the only reason the western villages produced enough grain last year." Nathaniel faced her in the dark blue coat she had embroidered during the first winter of their marriage. Once, he had stood beside her in frozen barns, holding a lantern while she measured grain for hungry families. Now he regarded the same work as an embarrassment to be removed. "For 3 consecutive years," he said, "Harcourt's agricultural income has declined, because the summers were unusually wet, and Mr. Vane has offered a way to recover those losses." At Nathaniel's right stood Silas Vane, the newly appointed agricultural advisor. His black gloves were spotless despite the mud beneath everyone else's boots. Beside him waited his widowed sister, Lady Beatrice Vale, whose visits to Harcourt had become increasingly frequent since Nathaniel began excluding Clara from estate meetings. Silas inclined his head. "The Crown requires a large delivery of grain from its approved estates," he explained. "If Harcourt fulfills the contract, the profits will restore every loss within the year." "And if Harcourt fails?" Clara asked. Silas's expression did not change. "We will not fail." "That was not my question." A faint murmur moved through the assembled tenants. Clara looked directly at Nathaniel. "What security did you offer against the advance?" His silence answered before his words did. "The commercial farms," he said at last. Several tenants turned toward one another. Those farms included cottages, grazing rights, and fields cultivated by the same families for generations. Nathaniel had not merely risked his income, he had placed their homes behind Silas's promise. Clara felt the full weight of what he had concealed from her. "You mortgaged their land without consulting the estate council." "I consulted the members willing to discuss recovery instead of predicting disaster." "You mean the members Silas selected?" Nathaniel's face hardened. Clara knew that look. He had worn it more often during the past year, whenever tenants sought her opinion before his. What began as financial anxiety had become something more dangerous, resentment of the authority she had earned. Silas stepped closer to the table. "The Duchess has repeatedly delayed planting, rejected commercially purchased seed, and maintained private reserves outside the Duke's accounts. Whatever her intentions, no estate can function under 2 competing authorities." "I delayed planting because the western ground was still waterlogged," Clara replied. "The seed you purchased was stored in a damp warehouse. Much of it may germinate, but weak roots will not survive saturated soil. The first shoots appeared within 9 days, and they are already yellowing." Nathaniel struck the table with his palm. Several envelopes jumped. "Enough. Every meeting becomes the same argument. I give an order, and you persuade the tenants that obeying it will destroy them. I show them what is happening in their fields. You teach them to distrust me. No, Nathaniel. You do that each time you demand obedience instead of evidence." The courtyard fell silent. For one fleeting moment, something uncertain passed through his face. Clara saw the man who had once praised her knowledge before these same families. He knew she had predicted the previous 2 harvest losses accurately. He knew her preserved wheat had kept 3 villages from purchasing grain at ruinous prices. He could still stop this. Then Silas placed a document before him. "The commissioner will review the estate in 12 days, he said quietly. "If your grace allows the Duchess to defy your authority today, every decision concerning the Crown contract may be questioned." Lady Beatrice leaned toward Nathaniel. "Everyone is watching." Clara saw the decision settle over him. Nathaniel did not choose Silas because the evidence was stronger. He chose him because retreating publicly would wound his pride. The Duchess is removed from all responsibility for the granaries and agricultural accounts, Nathaniel announced. Her estate allowance will be suspended until an independent examination determines the extent of the losses incurred under her management. Clara's throat tightened. Her allowance paid Mrs. Finch, Alice, and the 2 widows who catalogued seed in the laboratory. Without it, Clara could neither maintain her work nor protect the women who depended upon her. "You have already judged me," she said. "Do not insult us both by calling what follows an independent examination." Nathaniel looked toward the steward. "Mr. Vane will assume temporary control of the laboratory and every reserve connected to it. The workers will remain in their cottages until the commissioner completes his inquiry." Silas glanced sharply at him. He had evidently expected the cottages to be cleared immediately. It was a small restraint, but Clara took no comfort from it. Nathaniel had still surrendered her records, her livelihood, and the safety of the villages to a man whose seed was already failing in the ground. 2 footmen lifted the largest chest. One brass corner caught against the table. The old wooden base split, sending dozens of envelopes across the stones. A servant stepped backward and crushed one beneath his boot. Golden barley scattered into the sunlight. Clara crouched instinctively and gathered several grains into her palm. The barley had been preserved from her father's final harvest. She knew its narrow crease, darkened tip, and uneven shape as intimately as she knew her own handwriting. But the grains in her hand were round and unnaturally smooth. A yellow powder marked her glove. She rubbed one grain between her fingers. Beneath the coating lay pale, inferior barley of the kind commonly sold as animal feed. Her grief gave way to cold attention. Clara examined the broken envelope. The paper was hers. The label carried her handwriting. Even the red wax seal appeared correct, but the cord had been secured with a square knot. Mrs. Finch used a double loop. So did every woman trained in Clara's laboratory. Someone had opened the envelope, replaced its contents, and resealed it. Clara looked across the other drawers. One wax impression leaned slightly to the left. Another envelope had been folded along the wrong edge. Tiny inconsistencies, nearly invisible to anyone who had not handled the collection every day. The collection Nathaniel was condemning was already gone. She rose with the false barley in her palm. "When did your men first enter my laboratory?" she asked Silas. His polite expression remained intact. "Any inspection was conducted under your husband's authority." "That was not my question." Nathaniel stepped forward. "What are you accusing him of now?" Clara extended her stained glove. "This is not my barley." Lady Beatrice gave a soft, disbelieving laugh. "It came from a sealed envelope bearing your name." "The envelope is mine. The grain is not." "How convenient," Nathaniel said. "The moment your records are examined, you declare the evidence false. Look at it." "I have listened to enough objections." "Then do not listen. Use your eyes." Clara placed one false grain beside an escaped kernel lodged within the cracked wooden base. The older kernel was narrower, darker, and visibly different. Nathaniel looked down. He saw the difference. Clara knew he did. But the entire courtyard was watching, and Silas's contract lay open upon the table. Nathaniel turned to the steward. "Continue loading the wagons. Nothing is to be destroyed until the commissioner's representative has inspected it, but every chest is to be removed from the Duchess's control." It was more cautious than his original command, yet it did nothing to correct the accusation or restore Clara's authority. Nathaniel had recognized a contradiction and chosen to bury it beneath procedure. The servants began gathering the spilled grain. Clara quietly slipped 3 coated kernels into the seam of her glove. Anger would give Silas reason to call her unstable. Evidence might give her something better. A door slammed behind them. Mrs. Finch hurried from the laboratory, her gray hair loose beneath her cap. Blood ran from a cut above her wrist. "Your Grace," she called. "Stop those wagons." Silas moved toward her, but Clara placed herself between them. Nathaniel frowned. "What happened to you?" The south window was broken. Someone searched the inventory room. Mrs. Finch struggled for breath. "The master ledger is gone." Silas addressed Nathaniel rather than the injured woman. "Your Grace, I warned you that records might be removed before the examination." Mrs. Finch stared at him. "You know very well who removed them." Whispers spread through the courtyard. Silas reached inside his coat and produced a folded paper. "I had hoped to handle this privately," he said. "But Mrs. Finch has made that impossible." Nathaniel opened the document. Clara recognized her stationery and the careful imitation of her handwriting. It ordered Mrs. Finch to remove the valuable seeds, replace them with inferior grain, and conceal the original collection before the estate inspection. At the bottom stood Clara's name. Nathaniel read the page twice. "What date does it bear?" Clara asked. He did not answer. She stepped closer and saw it herself. The 12th of March. On that date, Clara had been more than 200 miles away in Scotland, attending her dying aunt. Nathaniel had received letters from her throughout the journey. He had even sent his own physician when her aunt's condition worsened. He knew she could not have issued the instructions in person as the forged letter claimed. "This proves the document is false," Clara said. "You know where I was." Nathaniel's grip tightened around the paper. Silas spoke before he could respond. "The letter may have been prepared earlier and dated later. The commissioner should determine its authenticity." "It says I opened the drawers for Mrs. Finch on the 12th, Clara replied. "Ask Nathaniel whether I was at Harcourt that day." Every face turned toward the Duke. This was his second opportunity to choose the truth. Nathaniel looked at Clara, then at the tenants, and finally at the crown contract waiting on the table. "Mrs. Finch will remain in the gatehouse until she can be questioned," he said. "The letter and the grain will be placed under seal." Clara stared at him. "You know that date clears us both." "I know it raises questions." "No, it answers one." Nathaniel signaled to the guards. They took Mrs. Finch by the arms. She did not resist until Silas approached. Then fear transformed her face. "Do not let his men guard me," she said. "Please." Nathaniel hesitated, but not long enough. "She remains under my protection." "You have already placed that protection in Silas's hands," Clara said. As the guards led Mrs. Finch past her, the older woman stumbled. Clara caught her for a moment. Something cold pressed into her palm. A small iron key. "The abandoned chapel," Mrs. Finch whispered, "beneath the altar." Silas stepped toward them, and the guards pulled the widow away. Clara closed her fingers around the key. Beyond the courtyard wall, the first wagon carrying the confiscated chests reached the fork in the estate road. Nathaniel had ordered it taken to the riverside storehouse for inspection. Instead, the driver looked behind him and turned the horses toward the abandoned chapel. Silas watched it go and smiled. Clara did not follow the wagon immediately. Silas still stood in the courtyard, and 2 guards had been ordered to watch her. Running toward the chapel would only warn him that Mrs. Finch had revealed something important. She slipped the iron key into her sleeve and approached Nathaniel beneath the stone archway. "You know the letter is false." Nathaniel held the document tightly. "I know its date raises questions. It claims I opened the seed drawers here on March 12th. I was in Scotland." "You could have written other instructions before leaving." "Then ask the coachman who brought me home. Ask the physician you sent to my aunt. Examine the letters I posted each day." Nathaniel glanced toward the courtyard, where tenants still watched the wagons depart. "I will investigate after the commissioner arrives. By then, Silas will have removed everything that could prove what happened." "That is an accusation, not evidence. You saw the false grain with your own eyes." He hesitated, and Clara understood the truth. Nathaniel no longer fully believed Silas, but admitting that publicly would require him to reverse the decision he had just made. "Release Mrs. Finch," she said. "She remains confined until she is questioned. Then make certain your guards, not Silas's men, protect her." Nathaniel's expression tightened. "She is under my authority." "So was my collection." Clara left him before anger betrayed her. The search of her apartments had already begun. Drawers stood open, gowns had been removed from their trunks, and several footmen were examining her correspondence. Alice Mercer waited near the window. "Mr. Vane's secretary took your letters from Scotland," she whispered. "He also removed your father's field journal." The letters could prove Clara's absence on March 12th. The journal contained years of notes identifying every preserved variety in her collection. Silas was not looking for evidence. He was destroying it. Clara placed the 3 false barley grains and the chapel key in Alice's hand. "Hide these." Alice slipped them into a small pocket beneath her petticoat. "What are you going to do?" "Find out what Silas sent to the chapel." From the window, Clara watched a second cart follow the first. It carried empty sacks, wooden crates, and 2 men from Silas's private staff. There was no lamp oil or straw. The men were not preparing a fire. They were preparing to move whatever had been hidden there. Clara waited until the servants changed guard, then borrowed Alice's plain brown cloak. Together they passed through the service corridor and crossed the kitchen yard carrying empty baskets. No one stopped 2 women dressed for an ordinary errand. They reached the abandoned chapel by following the orchard wall. Fresh wheel tracks cut through the weeds. The main doors had been chained, but part of the roof above the old vestry had collapsed, leaving a narrow opening near the rear. Clara climbed onto the fallen stones and looked inside. 3 men were moving small wooden cases from the wagon toward the altar. Each case bore the red thread Clara used to mark seed selected for long-term preservation. Her collection had not been taken to the river. It had been stolen before Nathaniel ever ordered its destruction. One man lifted a concealed door beneath the altar. The others carried the cases down a flight of stone steps. When they returned outside for the last load, Clara and Alice entered through the broken vestry. The chapel smelled of damp stone and old timber. Clara fitted Mrs. Finch's key into a small lock at the base of the altar. It turned. Below lay a narrow underground chamber once used for storing communion wine. Clara raised a lantern and descended. The missing seed cases stood against one wall. Several had already been repacked into merchant sacks without the Harcourt crest. On a table nearby lay pages from her father's journal, shipping receipts, and samples of the commercially purchased grain Silas had ordered planted across the estate. Clara opened one sample bag. A stale, sour odor rose from it. The kernels had darkened around the crease. They had been stored in damp conditions and then dried to conceal the damage. Some might germinate, but the weakened seedlings would fail quickly in Harcourt's waterlogged fields. Silas did not need poison. He only needed Nathaniel to force the tenants to plant ruined seed at the wrong time. A weak sound came from behind a wooden partition. Alice raised the lantern. A young man lay bound on a narrow cot, bruised and barely conscious. Clara recognized Thomas Reed, the agricultural clerk accused of stealing estate funds 2 months earlier. His eyes opened. "Your Grace?" Clara cut the rope around his wrists with a small pruning knife. "Who did this?" "Vane's men. I found the loan accounts." Thomas struggled to sit up. "The Crown contract is only the beginning. If Harcourt cannot deliver the grain, Silas gains control of the commercial farms." Clara looked at the stolen seed cases. "He intends to cause the failure himself." Thomas nodded. "And your husband gave him the authority to do it." Footsteps crossed the chapel floor above them. Clara extinguished the lantern. The concealed door slammed shut, and a bolt slid into place from the other side. Then a man's voice spoke through the wood. "Mr. Vane said no one who entered this chamber was to leave it." The chamber fell into darkness. Alice rushed up the steps and pushed against the concealed door. The bolt held firm. Clara relit the lantern and turned to Thomas. "Is there another way out?" "A ventilation passage behind the seed cases," he said, "but the outer grate is fixed in stone." Footsteps moved across the chapel floor. A moment later, smoke drifted through the gaps around the door. Silas's men were not trying to burn the entire chapel. They had piled damp straw above the chamber to fill it with smoke and suffocate whoever was trapped below without attracting attention from the estate. Clara and Alice dragged the seed cases away from the rear wall. Behind them was a narrow opening blocked by an iron grate. The mortar around it remained solid. Alice pulled at the bars. "We cannot break this." Thomas struggled to his feet. His face tightened with pain. "There is a drainage opening outside. If someone removed the outer stones—" "No one knows we are here," Alice said. Clara examined the chamber. They had only minutes before the smoke became too thick to breathe. She took one of the damp seed samples from the table and wrapped it inside a page bearing Silas's warehouse mark. The remaining papers could be replaced or dismissed as forgeries. This sample, however, could be compared with the grain already planted in Harcourt's fields. Thomas noticed the document in her hand. "That mark belongs to Belhaven," he said. "Silas moved the good seed through a merchant there." "Which merchant?" "I never learned the name. I found the payment in the accounts, and 2 days later his men took me." A heavy object struck the hidden door above them. The men were sealing its edges. Smoke thickened across the ceiling. Clara helped Thomas toward the ventilation opening. "Stay close to the floor." Alice began coughing. Clara tore a strip from her petticoat and pressed it into the younger woman's hand. Then metal scraped against stone on the other side of the grate. Everyone froze. A muffled voice called through the opening. "Your Grace?" Clara recognized Daniel Price, the young gamekeeper whose mother worked in the western granary. "Daniel? I saw you enter the orchard and followed. Stand back." A tool struck the outer stones. Once. Twice. The grate shifted. Clara and Alice pulled from inside while Daniel worked from the drainage ditch. Part of the mortar broke away, opening a space barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Alice went first. Clara pushed Thomas toward the passage, but he resisted. "The seed cases, we cannot carry them through. If Vane takes them, you will have no reserve. I would rather lose the seed than leave you here." Together, Clara and Daniel dragged Thomas through the opening. Clara followed last, clutching the sample and warehouse page beneath her cloak. They collapsed in the wet grass behind the chapel. Daniel looked from Thomas's bruised face to the smoke escaping through the broken roof. Mr. Vane told the estate that Reed stole money and fled. "He discovered Silas's accounts," Clara said. "That is why he disappeared." Hoofbeats sounded on the road. Daniel helped them into the trees before 3 riders reached the chapel. One wore Silas's colors. The others were estate guards who now answered to him under Nathaniel's order. Clara watched them remove the remaining seed cases. "We need to take Thomas somewhere Silas cannot search," she whispered. "My uncle has an empty keeper's cottage in Miller's Wood," Daniel said. "No one has used it since winter." They reached the cottage before dusk. Alice cleaned Thomas's wounds while Clara examined the page she had saved. It listed 3 shipments from Harcourt to Belhaven, each recorded as spoiled animal grain, yet the weights matched the missing reserve cases exactly. Silas was disguising Clara's valuable seed as worthless cargo. Thomas pointed to a set of initials beside the final entry. "Those belong to Silas's clerk. If we find the complete ledger, we can connect him to the shipments." "Where is it?" "I hid it before they caught me. Mrs. Finch knows the location." Clara looked toward Harcourt Manor. Mrs. Finch remained confined in the gatehouse, surrounded by men Silas now controlled. Daniel checked the pistol at his belt. "We should tell the Duke what we found." Nathaniel saw proof that the letter was false, and still allowed Mrs. Finch to be taken, Clara said. "Until he chooses evidence over his pride, we cannot depend upon him." A church bell rang from the direction of the manor. 3 slow strokes. Daniel's face changed. "What does that signal mean?" Alice asked. "That a prisoner is being transferred." Clara rose. Silas was moving Mrs. Finch before Nathaniel could question her, and if the widow knew where the missing ledger was hidden, she might not survive the journey. Daniel knew which road the prison cart would take. "The north gate is watched," he said, leading Clara through Miller's Wood. "But the bridge road is narrow. They will have to slow near the old toll house." Alice remained at the cottage with Thomas, while Clara and Daniel hurried through the trees. They reached the road as a covered cart approached between 2 mounted guards. Daniel recognized the older rider as his uncle, Matthew Price. He stepped into the road. "Uncle, stop." Matthew pulled his horse aside. The second guard reached for his pistol, but Daniel raised both hands. "Thomas Reed is alive," he said. "We found him imprisoned beneath the abandoned chapel." The guard looked toward Clara. "The Duchess is confined to the manor." "Then Silas has lied to you twice," Clara replied. "Where are you taking Mrs. Finch?" "To Belhaven for questioning." "Under whose authority?" The man produced a folded order bearing Nathaniel's seal. Clara examined it without touching the paper. Nathaniel had ordered Mrs. Finch held at the gatehouse until he questioned her personally. He had never mentioned Belhaven. "The seal may be genuine," Clara said, "but the instruction is not. Take it directly to the Duke and ask whether he signed it." Uncertainty crossed the guard's face. From inside the cart, Mrs. Finch struck the wall. "They searched me for the ledger," she called. "When they could not find it, Mr. Vane ordered them to move me." Matthew dismounted and unlocked the door. The second guard protested, but he did not draw his weapon. Whatever loyalty Silas had purchased was not strong enough to make the man abduct a duchess and an elderly widow in daylight. Mrs. Finch emerged with bruised wrists. "Where is the ledger?" Clara asked. "In the western granary, beneath the loose board behind the weighing scale." "Why did Silas think you had it?" "Because Thomas told me what he discovered before they took him. They left the road before Silas's men could follow. At the keeper's cottage, Mrs. Finch wept when she saw Thomas alive, but Clara gave them little time. I need to know how Beatrice obtained my handwriting." Mrs. Finch wiped her eyes. "While you were in Scotland, Lady Beatrice came to the laboratory. She said the Duke wanted a clean copy of the seed inventory for the Crown contract. She asked me to write the headings, then insisted upon finishing the work herself. She was practicing my hand." Mrs. Finch nodded. "She also borrowed several letters from your desk. I thought His Grace had authorized it." "And Nathaniel's seal?" "I saw her press warm wax against one of his private orders. She claimed she was testing whether the impression had been damaged." Beatrice had not stolen the original seal. She had copied its impression and created a duplicate. It explained why Nathaniel still possessed his own seal and had not noticed anything missing. The evidence was becoming clearer, but they still lacked the complete accounts linking Silas to the stolen seed and the mortgage scheme. Clara turned to Daniel. "Can we reach the western granary unseen? If we go through the lower pasture." The granary stood beside several newly planted fields. As they approached, Clara noticed rows of pale shoots rising from the dark soil. She knelt and pulled one seedling free. The roots were short, brown at the tips, and already softening. Mrs. Finch examined it beside her. "The soil has not drained, and the seed was damaged before planting," Clara said. "Silas had created a failure that could still appear natural. After 3 wet summers, another ruined harvest would be blamed on weather, and on Clara's former management." They entered the granary through a rear grain hatch. Behind the weighing scale, Daniel lifted the loose board. The ledger remained inside. Thomas's entries documented the purchase of damp grain, the removal of Clara's reserve, and payments routed through a Belhaven merchant. Several pages also listed loans made to tenant families without their knowledge. Silas intended to convert the estate's losses into private debts, then use those debts to pressure families from their farms. A door opened at the front of the granary. Clara closed the ledger. George Bell, one of the western farmers, stood in the entrance. His expression moved from shock to relief. "Your Grace, they said you had fled after stealing the seed." "Silas stole it," Clara replied, "and the grain he ordered you to plant is failing." George looked toward the fields. "How long do we have?" Clara examined the damaged roots once more. "If the rain continues, perhaps 3 days before most of these seedlings cannot be saved." George's face paled. Nearly every western field was planted from the same shipment. Clara held the ledger against her chest. "Then we must show the farmers what Silas has done." "And the Duke?" Clara looked toward Harcourt Manor. "Nathaniel will be given one final chance to examine the evidence, but we will not wait for his permission to save your land." Outside, the granary bell began ringing. Someone had discovered them. The granary bell continued ringing. Within minutes, workers and farmers gathered outside. 2 estate guards arrived behind them, but neither attempted to arrest Clara while so many tenants were watching. George Bell stepped into the doorway beside her. "Her Grace has found something you should see." Clara carried the ledger outside and placed it on an empty grain cart. Then she held up the damaged seedling she had pulled from the field. "This is not a disease," she said. "The seed was already damaged by damp storage, and Silas ordered it planted before the soil had drained. If the rain continues, most of these fields will fail." A farmer named John Miller shook his head. "Mr. Vane said the yellow shoots were normal. They are not." Clara cut open the sample taken from the chapel. The sour smell of spoiled grain rose from the bag. "Compare it with what you planted." Several farmers examined the kernels. Their expressions changed as they recognized the same darkened creases. Mrs. Finch opened the ledger. The good seed was removed from Harcourt and recorded as spoiled animal grain. These entries show it being sent through Belhaven while inferior grain was issued to your farms. Why would anyone ruin the Duke's own harvest? Miller asked. Because Silas does not need to own the harvest, Clara replied. He needs Harcourt to fail. She turned to the final pages. Beside the names of tenant families were debts many of them had never agreed to assume. Cartage fees, seed advances, milling charges, and penalties had been added to their accounts. George found his own name. The color left his face. This says I borrowed £40. Did you? I have never borrowed a shilling from Vane. Clara showed him the signature beneath the entry. It was not George's. Below it stood Nathaniel's authorization allowing Silas to recover unpaid estate debts from future leases. A carriage approached from the manor. Nathaniel stepped down with 4 guards. Silas and Lady Beatrice were not with him. Relief crossed his face when he saw Clara alive, but it vanished when he noticed Mrs. Finch and the open ledger. Clara, he said, come back to the house. We will examine this privately. You accused me before these people. This concerns the Crown contract and the security of the estate. It concerns their homes. Nathaniel lowered his voice. Do not turn an investigation into a rebellion. Clara opened the ledger to George's account. Did you authorize Silas to collect tenant debts? I authorized him to recover legitimate arrears. This debt is forged. Nathaniel examined the entry. George stepped forward, his cap crushed between his hands. My family has worked the Western farm for 31 years, Your Grace. If that paper is enforced, I lose the lease. Nathaniel looked at the farmer he had known since boyhood. For the first time, Silas's scheme was no longer an argument between husband and wife. It had a face, a home, and children who would suffer because Nathaniel had signed without asking what power he was giving away. I did not approve this specific debt, he said. But you gave Silas the authority to create it, Clara replied. Nathaniel closed the ledger. I will suspend all debt collections until the commissioner reviews the accounts. And the fields? His silence returned. Clara pointed toward the yellow shoots. The damaged seedlings must be removed before they rot into the soil. The fields need time to drain before we replant. That would mean destroying nearly every acre planted under the Crown contract. Those acres are already lost. If you are wrong, we destroy the only harvest Harcourt has left. And if I am right, waiting will destroy the farms along with it. The farmers watched Nathaniel. He had brought guards, inherited authority, and a contract bearing the Crown's seal. Clara had only a damaged seedling, a stolen ledger, and 14 years of earned trust. Nathaniel turned to the guards. No one is to remove any crop until I have examined the fields myself. George looked at Clara. We may not have time. You do not, she said. Nathaniel's expression hardened. That is my order. Clara faced the farmers. I cannot command you. Nathaniel has taken that authority from me. But I can tell you what the soil is telling us. By tomorrow, the roots will be worse. Within 3 days, much of this crop will be beyond saving. George looked toward his field, then at the false debt recorded beside his name. He walked to the nearest row, drove both hands into the wet earth, and pulled out the first line of dying seedlings. One by one, the other farmers followed him. Nathaniel's guards reached for their weapons. Your Grace? Their captain asked. Nathaniel stood between his own command and the people refusing to obey it. For the first time, he would have to decide whether preserving his authority mattered more than saving Harcourt. Nathaniel looked at the guards, then at the farmers tearing dying seedlings from the earth. Lower your weapons. The captain hesitated. Your Grace, they are defying a direct order, and they are unarmed. The guards stepped back. Nathaniel entered the field and pulled a seedling from an untouched row. Mud clung to its shallow roots. When he pressed one between his fingers, the brown tip broke apart. Clara watched recognition settle across his face. How much can be saved? He asked. The fields planted yesterday may be cleared and replanted once the ground drains. The older plantings are probably lost. And the Crown delivery? The contract concerns stored grain, not this season's harvest. Silas used it to pressure you into planting before the land was ready. Nathaniel glanced toward the farmers who had obeyed his orders and now faced losing weeks of labor. You warned me. Yes. I believed you were protecting your control of the granaries. You found it easier to question my motives than Silas's promises. He did not deny it. Nathaniel ordered the remaining fields inspected and suspended all planting instructions issued by Silas. It was a necessary decision, but Clara noticed he still described the matter as an error requiring investigation, not a betrayal he had willingly enabled. A boy came running from the bridge road. 3 wagons are leaving the estate, he called. They are carrying the Duchess's seed cases. Clara turned to George. The bridge. Farmers moved before Nathaniel could issue an order. They took carts, horses, and every available path toward the old stone crossing. The wagons reached it first, but the narrow bridge was already blocked by 2 farm carts placed wheel to wheel. Dozens of tenants stood behind them. Silas's clerk leaned from the leading wagon. Clear the road. These goods are being transferred under the Duke's authority. Nathaniel rode forward beside Clara. I gave no order to remove them from Harcourt. The clerk produced a document bearing his seal. Nathaniel read it and stiffened. The signature resembled his, but Clara saw the difference immediately. Nathaniel always ended the final stroke of Harcourt beneath the line. On this document, it curved upward. The signature was copied, she said. Nathaniel looked at her, then at the duplicate impression of his seal. Mrs. Finch had been right. Beatrice had acquired both the handwriting and the means to reproduce his authority. Nathaniel faced the drivers. You will turn the wagons around. The drivers looked toward Silas's clerk. That hesitation exposed where their true loyalty lay. We were paid to deliver the cases to Belhaven, one finally admitted. Mr. Vane said the Duke had approved the sale. What warehouse? Clara asked. We were not told. A merchant was to meet us beyond the southern toll road. George climbed onto the first wagon and opened a case. Inside were Clara's preserved varieties, repacked but unharmed. The farmers surrounded the wagons without violence. Silas's hired men could not cross the bridge, and the drivers had no reason to fight an entire village for cargo that did not belong to them. Nathaniel ordered the seed returned to the western granary under joint guard. Clara stopped him. Not under the authority of one man again. 2 farmers, Mrs. Finch, and your steward will hold separate keys. A few days earlier, Nathaniel would have rejected the condition as another challenge. Now he looked at the forged order in his hand. Agreed. Before they could return to the fields, a black carriage appeared on the southern road. It bore the royal arms. The carriage stopped before the blocked bridge, and Sir Edmund Hale, the Crown's agricultural commissioner, stepped down. 2 officers followed him, carrying document cases. Nathaniel frowned. You were not expected for another 11 days. I came early, because serious allegations reached my office. Sir Edmund unfolded a sealed complaint. It accused Clara of stealing Harcourt's seed reserve, forging tenant debts, imprisoning Thomas Reed, and inciting farmers to destroy crops contracted to the Crown. Clara recognized Silas's strategy. He had sent the accusations before she discovered the truth, ensuring that every attempt to protect the estate would appear to confirm her guilt. Sir Edmund surveyed the uprooted fields, the blocked bridge, and the recovered wagons. Until this matter is examined, he announced, no grain may be moved, no account altered, and no witness removed from Harcourt. He turned to Clara. Duchess, the complaint bears your husband's seal and states that he personally requested your arrest. Clara looked at Nathaniel. This time, his pride would not allow him to remain silent without condemning her. I never requested my wife's arrest, Nathaniel said. Sir Edmund studied him. The complaint bears your seal. So does the forged order found on those wagons. Nathaniel handed him both documents. The commissioner compared the impressions, then placed them inside his case. Until I determine which orders are genuine, no one leaves Harcourt. The inquiry began that afternoon in the Western Village Hall. Sir Edmund allowed no private meetings and accepted no accusation without supporting evidence. Clara first presented the false barley from the courtyard beside a genuine kernel recovered from the broken chest. Mrs. Finch explained the different knots and resealed envelopes. Then Clara opened the damaged grain sample from the chapel. Sir Edmund summoned 2 independent farmers. Both confirmed that the same sour-smelling seed had been issued across the western fields. "This proves the grain was unfit," he said. "It does not yet prove who knowingly purchased it." Thomas Reed was brought from the keeper's cottage. Though still weak, he identified entries in the recovered ledger, showing that Silas's clerk had approved payment after receiving a warning from the Belhaven warehouse about moisture damage. "That warning was removed from the estate files," Thomas said. "I copied its date before Mr. Vane's men took me. Sir Edmund recorded the testimony but remained cautious. Why imprison you instead of dismissing you? Because I discovered the loan agreement." Nathaniel went still. Thomas opened the ledger to a page Clara had not yet examined. It referred to a private contract granting Silas control of Harcourt's commercial farms if the estate failed to fulfill the crown delivery or repay his advance. Sir Edmund turned to Nathaniel. "Did you sign such an agreement?" Clara watched her husband. He could deny it and force the commissioner to spend days locating the original, or admit that Silas's scheme had been built upon a decision he had concealed from her. "Yes," Nathaniel said. The room fell silent. "I believed the crown contract would restore our losses before the security could be claimed." "Did the Duchess know?" "No." "Did your estate council approve it?" "No." Clara felt no satisfaction. His confession did not erase the danger. It merely revealed how much he had risked to avoid admitting that Harcourt was struggling. "You wagered their farms to protect your reputation," she said. Nathaniel met her eyes. "Yes." Sir Edmund next examined the forged letter accusing Clara. The document stated that she had personally opened the seed drawers on March 12th. Nathaniel confirmed she had been in Scotland that day. Mrs. Finch then compared Clara's genuine writing with the imitation. The same errors appeared in the forged transfer order and in the complaint sent to Sir Edmund. Finally, she described seeing Beatrice copy Clara's inventory headings and take an impression of Nathaniel's seal. Lady Beatrice had not appeared at the inquiry. Neither had Silas. Sir Edmund immediately sent officers to the manor, but both siblings had already left by the eastern road. "Where would they go?" he asked. Thomas studied the ledger. Several payments were directed to a merchant identified only by the initials BGC, Belhaven Grain Company, Nathaniel said. Silas recommended them for the crown delivery. Clara turned through the final pages. The listed quantities were far larger than the seed cases recovered at the bridge. "This is not only my collection," she said. "These weights match the Northern Reserve." Nathaniel frowned. "That store was meant to remain untouched." Mrs. Finch lowered her eyes. "Lady Beatrice presented an order bearing your private seal last winter. She said the reserve was being moved because the northern roof needed repair. Where was it taken?" "Belhaven." The stolen reserve contained most of the grain Harcourt needed to fulfill its crown contract, and enough healthy seed to restore the damaged fields. Sir Edmund rose. "If Silas controls that store, he controls whether Harcourt succeeds or defaults." A messenger entered carrying a weather report from Belhaven. Heavy rain was expected before dawn, and the river was already rising. Thomas pointed to a note beside the warehouse payments. "Warehouse 27 stands below the flood embankment." Clara understood at once. Silas did not need to transport thousands of sacks or burn them. He only needed to open the warehouse sluice and let the river destroy the evidence. They had one night to reach Belhaven. They reached Belhaven shortly before midnight. Rain swept across the harbor, and the river had already risen over the lower quay. Warehouse 27 stood beyond the flood embankment, its doors locked and its ground floor windows boarded. Water poured through an open sluice beside the building. "Someone lifted the gate," Clara said. The rising river was being directed straight into the warehouse. Sir Edmund ordered his officers to break the lock. Inside, rows of grain sacks stood on wooden platforms barely inches above the spreading water. Clara cut open the nearest sack. Golden barley spilled into her palm. "This is the Northern Reserve." There were hundreds of sacks, far more than they could remove before the warehouse flooded. Nathaniel looked toward the wagons. "We cannot carry all of it back to Harcourt." "We do not need to," Clara said. "We need to lift it above the water." A storage loft crossed half the building, but its pulley had been disabled and the rope cut. Clara divided the workers into groups. Use the wagon ropes to repair the hoist. Move the seed grain first, the sacks marked with red thread. The contract grain can survive brief dampness if we spread it to dry. The planting seed cannot not. The Harcourt farmers formed a line from the lower floor to the loft. Nathaniel removed his coat and joined them. No one addressed him as Duke. For the first time, he worked under Clara's instructions while the people whose homes he had endangered watched. Thomas remained with Sir Edmund near the warehouse office. Inside a locked cabinet, they found bills of lading showing that the grain had arrived from Harcourt months earlier, but had been registered under the Belhaven Grain Company. These records proved the reserve was transferred, Sir Edmund said. Not that the transfer was illegal. Thomas opened the ledger recovered from Harcourt and matched its shipment numbers to the warehouse receipts. The Harcourt accounts described the same grain as spoiled animal feed, he said, but these documents value it as crown-grade wheat. Someone concealed its true worth before removing it. Water reached Clara's ankles. One of the repaired ropes snapped, dropping a sack onto the flooded floor. Nathaniel and George lifted it before the grain absorbed too much water. "The eastern wall is taking the current," George warned. "If it gives way, the entire lower floor will flood." Clara examined the direction of the water. "Block the sluice channel with empty carts. We do not need to stop the river, only slow it." Daniel and several farmers pushed 2 carts into the channel. Others filled empty sacks with gravel from the quay. The barrier bent beneath the current but held long enough for the remaining seed grain to reach the loft. By dawn, most of the northern reserve was above the flood line. Some contract grain had been damaged, but not enough to ruin Harcourt's delivery. Clara stood beneath the loft, soaked and exhausted, watching the last red-threaded sack rise from the water. Nathaniel approached her. "You saved what I allowed Silas to steal." "We saved it," she replied, looking toward the farmers. "Remember the difference," hoofbeats sounded outside. Silas entered the warehouse with Lady Beatrice, a solicitor, and 6 hired guards. He appeared almost pleased by the sight of the rescued grain. "You have worked very hard to preserve my property," he said. Sir Edmund stepped forward. "This warehouse is under Crown authority." Silas handed him a contract. The grain and warehouse belonged to the Belhaven Grain Company. Harcourt transferred them as security for an unpaid advance. Nathaniel took the document. His genuine signature appeared on the final page. "I signed a security agreement," he said, "not a sale. The distinction is addressed in the clause you neglected to read." Silas pointed to a paragraph granting him immediate control if Harcourt interfered with the Crown planting schedule or removed crops without his approval. By ordering the guards to stand down while the farmers uprooted the damaged seedlings, Nathaniel had triggered the clause himself. Silas looked across the flooded warehouse. "Unless the Duke denies that he permitted the destruction of those fields, every sack above us is legally mine." Nathaniel could preserve his estate only by blaming Clara and the tenants. Sir Edmund waited for his answer. Nathaniel read the clause again. If he claimed that Clara and the tenants had uprooted the fields without his consent, Silas could not seize the grain under the agreement, but Clara would be accused of destroying crops contracted to the Crown, and the farmers who followed her could lose their leases. Silas waited. Nathaniel folded the document. "I ordered my guards to stand down," he said. "I examined the roots myself and permitted the damaged crop to be removed." Clara watched Silas's confidence falter. "Then you admit the condition was breached," Silas replied. "I admit my decision. I will not transfer its consequences to my wife or tenants." Sir Edmund took the contract. "A breached condition does not excuse fraud used to create that breach. If Mr. Vane knowingly supplied damaged seed, his claim may be void." Thomas entered the warehouse office with 2 receipts and a folded letter. The letter was the moisture warning he had copied before his imprisonment. Silas's clerk had kept the original because it carried the Belhaven Company's demand for a reduced purchase price. Silas had bought the spoiled grain cheaply, then charged Harcourt the price of sound seed. The first receipt recorded the Northern Reserve entering Warehouse 27 as low-value animal grain. The second offered the same shipment to the Crown as premium wheat. "You valued the grain one way when removing it from Harcourt and another when selling it," Thomas said. "The numbers match the estate ledger." Sir Edmund turned to Silas. You concealed the reserve's value, supplied unfit seed, and then attempted to claim the farms when the planting failed. Silas pointed toward Nathaniel. The Duke signed every authority I required, and that is why I bear responsibility for giving it to you, Nathaniel said. But my negligence does not make your fraud lawful. Lady Beatrice stepped forward. My brother acted under the Duke's seal. Mrs. Finch placed the forged transfer order beside Nathaniel's genuine contract. The seal impressions are similar, she said, but the wax on the false order carries a crack across the crown. The same crack appears on every document Lady Beatrice brought to the laboratory. Beatrice's hand moved instinctively toward her reticule. A royal officer searched it and found a brass seal copied from Nathaniel's private impression. Its crown carried the same flaw. Beatrice looked at Nathaniel. You gave me access to the house. You allowed me to manage your correspondence. You never questioned what I carried from your study. Nathaniel did not defend himself. No, he said, I did not. Sir Edmund ordered Silas, Beatrice, and the clerk detained while the Belhaven accounts were seized. Their hired guards surrendered without resistance once the royal officers took control of the warehouse. The grain remained under crown protection. By morning, the rain weakened. Clara stood in the loft while workers spread the damp sacks for drying. Most of the seed reserve had survived, and enough contract grain remained to prevent immediate default. Nathaniel joined her, but kept several steps between them. I could have denied giving permission in the field, he said. Yes. You would have carried the blame, as you intended me to carry it in the courtyard. He lowered his eyes. I cannot undo that. No, you cannot. Sir Edmund approached with the confiscated agreements. The evidence clears Duchess Clara of theft, fraud, and destruction of the crown's property, he said. It also establishes probable charges against Silas Vane and Lady Beatrice. Nathaniel looked toward the rescued grain. Then Harcourt is safe. Not entirely. Sir Edmund held up the genuine loan agreement. The forged documents may be void, but your Grace's original advance remains unpaid. The estate is also responsible for replacing the spoiled grain issued under its authority. The tenants will not pay for it, Nathaniel said. Then you must. Sir Edmund explained that Nathaniel's London house, racing stable, and several properties not tied to tenant leases could be sold to cover the losses. Harcourt would survive, but Nathaniel would lose much of the wealth and comfort he had tried to protect. He accepted the consequence without argument. Clara felt no sudden forgiveness. One honest choice did not erase years of resentment or the public destruction of her name. Sir Edmund closed the documents. The findings will be announced tomorrow at Harcourt. The Duchess was condemned before her tenants, so her name must be restored before them. Nathaniel looked at Clara. In the same courtyard where he had accused his wife, he would now have to explain precisely how his pride had made the conspiracy possible. And this time, Silas would not be standing beside him to carry the blame. The following afternoon, the people of Harcourt gathered in the same courtyard where Clara's seed collection had been condemned. The broken oak chest stood at the center table. This time, it contained genuine golden barley recovered from Belhaven. Silas and Beatrice were absent. They had been taken before a magistrate to answer charges of fraud, forgery, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy to obtain Harcourt land through false accounts. Their property had been frozen pending trial, but Sir Edmund made clear that final judgment belonged to the court. He then faced the assembled tenants. The Crown's inquiry has found no evidence that Duchess Clara stole seed, falsified accounts, or destroyed a viable crop. The accusations against her were manufactured. Mrs. Finch was cleared of wrongdoing. Thomas Reed's dismissal was revoked, and the accusation that he had stolen estate money was formally withdrawn. Sir Edmund displayed the evidence separately. The false barley proved Clara's collection had been replaced. The Belhaven warning established that Silas knowingly purchased damp grain. Thomas's ledger connected the missing reserve to Warehouse 27. The duplicated seal linked Beatrice to the forged orders. The false debts revealed the plan to remove tenant families once Harcourt defaulted, but the evidence did not absolve Nathaniel. The Duke stepped forward without his ceremonial chain. I signed the agreement that placed your farms at risk, he said. I gave Silas authority over the granaries because he promised to conceal losses I was ashamed to admit. He looked toward Clara. My wife warned me about the soil, the damaged seed, and the danger within the contract. I did not reject her because she lacked evidence. I rejected her because the tenants trusted her judgment more than mine. No one moved. I knew she was in Scotland on the date of the letter used against her. Still, I allowed Mrs. Finch to be imprisoned and Clara's rooms to be searched, because admitting doubt would have required me to reverse a public decision. Clara had wanted him to name the truth without hiding behind Silas's deception. Now he did so before every person who had witnessed her humiliation. I removed her authority, suspended the income supporting her workers, and called her dishonest before this estate. Silas exploited my pride, but he did not create it. Those choices were mine. Nathaniel placed several documents on the table. His London house, racing stable, and unentailed hunting property would be sold to repay the advance and replace the damaged grain. Until those debts were settled, he would take no personal income from Harcourt. Every false tenant debt was cancelled. No family would lose a lease because of Silas's accounts. Through trustees, Nathaniel also transferred the northern property, seed laboratory, and future income from Clara's cultivated varieties into a separate settlement under her control. The arrangement would be filed through the proper court rather than depending upon his continued goodwill. Clara accepted the deeds. Nathaniel then offered her the granary keys. She did not take them. These stores should never again depend upon the judgment of one person, she said. A council would oversee the reserve, 2 elected tenant farmers, 1 granary worker, the estate steward, and Clara as agricultural advisor. No reserve could be sold, mortgaged, or relocated without recorded approval from the council. George Bell accepted the first key. Mrs. Finch accepted the second. Nathaniel kept none. 3 months later, smaller green fields covered the western farms. The season's losses could not be erased, but grain recovered from Belhaven carried the villages through winter, and no family was evicted. Clara remained only long enough to supervise the replanting. On the morning of her departure, Nathaniel found her beside the restored seed chests. "I will not ask you to forgive me," he said. "Good. And I will not ask when you are returning." Clara looked toward the wagons waiting in the courtyard. "I am not returning as your wife in residence. I will manage the northern property and continue my work there. What happens to our marriage will depend upon years of conduct, not one confession." Pain crossed his face, but he did not bargain with her boundary. "If there is anything I can provide for the new laboratory—" "No. Build trust here. Protect the leases. Obey the council even when it opposes you." Nathaniel lowered his head. "I will." The same wagons once ordered to carry Clara's collection away now stood loaded with planting chests, instruments, field journals, and young fruit trees. Mrs. Finch sat beside her. Thomas rode in the second wagon with copies of every recovered account. As the wheels crossed the stones where the false barley had been crushed, Clara opened her hand. Several grains of her father's golden barley rested in her palm. Nathaniel had once ordered them thrown into the river. Clara carried them north, toward land held in her own name, and planted them in soil no man could command her to abandon.